Hello, everybody. My name is Benjamin Day,
I am Jillian Mason, and I
and
endorse this message.
this is Medicare for All, the endorsed podcast for everybody who needs healthcare, including all of us here. Well, just in case you've been like under a rock for the last 6 months or so, we need to let you know two things that you may have missed out on. First, Kendrick won his beef with Drake. And second, there is a presidential election coming up. So, like any presidential election year, obviously everyone is like so focused on that big showdown at the top of the ticket. It means that a lot of the local and state races, congressional races, and referendums that will make up most of your ballot just get ignored in the press and often by voters themselves. But just because Anderson Cooper isn't covering your city's mayoral contest or your state's railroad commissioner race, I didn't even know that was a thing that I could vote on. It does
Really,
not mean
it's Texas specific. Sorry.
Okay, and if you live in Texas, your state railroad commissioner race.
Wow.
It doesn't mean that all those down ballot races are not, critically important in determining the future of your community, and especially for issues like healthcare, getting them onto the table, which is why we're particularly interested in this topic. So, for this episode, we're going to leave the speculation about Donald and Kamala to Anderson and take our own 360 view of why we all need to get in on the down ballot action and how we can bring healthcare justice to, the forefront of our election conversations as we're getting closer and closer. So to help us do that, we have two guests who know their way around. Get out the vote. Jillian, you want to introduce them?
Yeah, I do. I do just also briefly want to say that for those of us who are in Texas, railroad commissioner is a really important, really important race. They determine what happens with most of the public land in Texas, actually.
Next episode.
Yeah, next episode.
To make sure that the trains run on time.
Fantastic. Or don't, whatever.
Don't.
Okay, but to our illustrious guests, please let me begin. We have Jasmine Ruddy, rhymes with Buddy, Assistant Director of Campaigns at National Nurses United. She helps to lead the National Nurses political campaigns from Medicare to All to electoral work and more. And she is based out of Oakland, California. And her background is in the climate justice movement, campus student organizing in her home state of North Carolina. Love it. Welcome.
Hopefully all families good in North Carolina, Jasmine.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Doing okay, thanks. Yeah.
Good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then we also have Jonathan Cohn. And Jonathan Cohn is the policy director at Progressive Massachusetts, which does multi-issue advocacy work. He wears many hats in the political space in Massachusetts and has been active in many progressive issue and electoral campaigns over the past a little over a decade. Wild to think. We are so excited to have you guys here. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, we have these awesome guests, and I know Ben and I have also been involved a lot in local politics. So I thought it might be fun. Let's start out with a little go around, right? For our guests, when was the first time that you got involved in local politics and or a local election, and why were you moved to do so? Want to start with Jasmine?
Yeah, sure. I can kick us off. It's a great question and something I'm enjoying reflecting on. I would say, first of all, this is not the answer to the prompted question, but probably my strongest memory. There is a local elections I remember getting involved in, but probably my strongest first reaction memory that will really kind of date or age me is being very 2008 Obama pilled. I do have very strong memories of canvassing in my very conservative small hometown of North Carolina for Obama in 2008 and trying to get out the vote when I was 14, 15 years old. And just how that really shaped, how it really shaped my political, development. But I remember, I would say in terms of, getting involved in a local campaign, I think that I was probably in college when the first that I can really remember getting deeply involved in. I went to school in the Triangle in North Carolina at UNC Chapel Hill. And I remember being really involved in, student and campus organizing on climate justice. And we got involved in, some of the local elections in our county when I was on campus. I remember in 2011 and 2012, back to back, we had some ballot measures on the county ballot that were on the election to pass a transit tax in the Triangle area. There was an effort to pass these referendums, to pass these tax measures that would fund a light rail system that would connect the Triangle area. For folks who don't know, that's these three major cities: Durham, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh. And this was, over 10 years ago. I should say the spoiler alert is that this light rail still does not exist. But at the time, to pass these ballot measures, and they passed, ongoing. Yes, I think that it is true. In fact, still an ongoing effort. But it just felt like a really. I remember it feeling like such a really concrete and tangible way to feel like I was being involved in the climate justice movement and making an impact at like the county level, which is like totally possible, right? And it felt incredible that like we won and that these tax measures passed and that voters in the Triangle overwhelmingly supported this idea of light rail, right, in the state, which of course, going back to North Carolina and Hurricane Helene, I think just right now, for me, I'm just thinking all about how that underscores where we're at in the climate crisis and the dire need for us to expand, clean, public transit in our states, and just thinking about all these pieces too. But yeah, I think those ballot measures are the first things I remember, and just how much of an impact you can make it at such a local level.
Right? Because it's like, climate change is something that feels very big and abstract, right? But like you could ride on that local light rail train, right? Like, right? It's like so real. That makes, that's great. Thanks so much, Jasmine. How about you, Jonathan? What was your foray?
I'll note, so first ever campaign, and then I'll transition to the year after that was when my first ever campaign that I ended up spending time on was the Obama re-election campaign in 2012, back in my home city of Philadelphia. That was like right after grad school when I was applying for jobs. And it was when the Republicans in Harrisburg were trying to pass like a photo ID law. And I was like, I have time on my hands. If they're trying to prevent people from voting, I should probably put some of my energy to like increasing the number of people who vote. And realized that I enjoyed doing that I enjoyed canvassing. I don't know if I would have said I enjoyed phone banking, but I enjoyed canvassing. And realized that having been involved in a lot of environmental organizing in college, how I cared about the issues, and it built off some skill sets that I had from a campus job in the Office of Advancement, where I would doing like alumni outreach and had already been used to what like you do used to cold calling people.
Talking to people who don't want to be spoken to by you.
Exactly. Like I've already done that for a job where they're like, here are a bunch of alumni, get an interview with them, was what I did at undergrad. So transitioned well into campaign volunteering. But so that one had been my first one ever. But then after Philadelphia, I was in Baltimore for a hot minute, but then moved up to Boston in the summer of 2013. And when I found out that I was moving to Boston, I had been somewhat aware of the fact that Boston was having its first open mayoral race in 20 years. Because that was when like multi-term mayor Tom Menino was retiring. And I was like, oh, that's like a huge deal. I should figure out which candidate I want to support and volunteer for them. And so one of the first things that I did after finding out that I was going to be moving to Boston is I started looking up news articles about the debates happening for that like mess of a 12 candidate race.
Yes, that was
going on. And it was also at that time had obviously like community cared a lot about different climate issues, was also very big around public education, which is like an issue where the local level has a major impact. Since in Philly, where I was from, had been having like you'd seen over the years the way that so much of the public school budget was being siphoned off to charter schools, and that there had been like a pretty contentious kind of contract negotiations with the teachers in Philadelphia, where the city wanted to like eliminate the requirement that there even be water fountains in the schools.
Yeah.
And so that was a major issue on my mind, as well as because there are a number of other ones and like issues around inequality that were very live then and still very much so are. And so I ended up getting involved like with Felix Arroyo Jr.'s campaign in the office that was the in the JWJ office.
That's
Jillian.
right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Center Street.
So I ended up volunteering for that campaign. It was when I moved up to Boston in 2013, my first weekend was moving in. My second weekend was back in Philly for my sister's wedding. And my third one was already volunteering on a campaigin.
Not surprising. Not surprising.
Yeah. So that's the rest is history.
We'll go into some more of Jonathan's weird, wild, and wonderful history and electoral work later on. But how about you, Ben? Ben, how did you start out?
Oh, well, I have a confession to make for this episode, which is that I kind of hate elections and electoral work. I like issue-based organizing.
I wanted to see whether you were going to lie about it.
I mean, I love democracy, but hate elections. So I clearly need to reconcile some things with myself here. But I don't know. I find it so depressing. But it is true that there's more. I think there's more hopefulness at the local level. So anyway, I'm very like strategic about which electoral campaigns I get involved with, whereas I'm much more like I'll get involved with any issue-based organizing. I think one of my first ones was working for Sam Yoon, who was challenging Mayor Thomas Menino for mayor. This was when it was not an open seat, and we have one of the most strong mayor systems in the country. And Menino had pretty much like dictatorial control over the city. So that campaign was feisty, but it was completely crushed. And Sam Yoon could then not find a job in the Boston area afterwards, and he had to move to DC. So that was, I don't know, I think that was maybe my first one. The most exciting local election I got involved with was the campaign for Nika Eliugardo.
Nika.
I lived in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston for like 12 years. And our representative there was like the biggest douchebag on the planet who you've ever met. His name is Jeff Sanchez. I'll just call him out here. He was just.
I don't like to name names, but the name may or may not
Sanchez.
Sanchez.
I know
his initials are. Jeffrey.
This is probably one of and his phone number, if you want to call. It was one of the most progressive districts in all of the state, and he was like pretty far to the right of the Democratic Party. And he had risen to a pretty high position of power within the state Democratic Party. He was the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. And he was seen as basically unbeatable. And for a long time, we just didn't have any sort of really strong challengers to him. But Nika Eliugardo is this amazing candidate who ran against him. He raised more money than any candidate had ever raised in the history of the State House in Massachusetts. And we still beat his ass and took him out, one of the top ranked Democrats in the state, and replaced him with like a true progressive Medicare for All supporter and everything else. It was so satisfying. I was like, okay, I could do this kind of electoral work, but it's, you don't know if you're going to win at the beginning. So
yeah.
That's good. That's good. All right. Can I tell my story really quick? All right. It's just because it's super cute. All right. So it's suburban New Jersey, right? We're in the 90s. I'm about 11 or 12 years old, like in
amazing
5th grade, right? And I am I'm from a town called North Plainfield, New Jersey, right? So named because it is north of Plainfield, New Jersey. North Plainfield used to be a white flight suburb. Now it is majority Latinx, suburb still, I guess. But Plainfield was a majority Black and brown small city. And there was a move within our town of North Plainfield to change our name in order to distance ourselves from the Black and brown city to our south. And so they wanted to change the name of North Plainfield to Stony Brook, which does sound kind of waspy and bougie.
I thought you were going to say further North Plainfield.
Real far away from Plainfield. And so for some reason, one of the guys who was working on it was a ballot referendum question about whether we should change the town's name. For some reason, one of the guys who was working on this was like, it would be a really good idea to get children involved. And so there was a town-wide debate, and I got to talk about why we should not change the name of North Plainfield.
Whoa.
And I made it onto the front page of our local paper. Amazing. With the quote of the week, which is, North Plainfield shouldn't change its name. Stony Brook is just a dirty brook that divides our town, just like this issue is doing right now.
Oh, damn.
That is so articulate.
Oh, man. Articulate.
Amazing.
Like, I think that's important because it was the 90s. I didn't engage with any of the politics. But yes, anyway, so yeah, and we won. So it's always good to get an early win. But yeah, that was the cute one, the cute story.
I love it. You started earlier than most of us.
Yeah.
Again, though, why they decided to get children involved with this like racially fraught big budget issue, I don't know, but whatever. Regardless,
why not?
We all have. Do you see how we all have these warm, fuzzy memories of these local campaigns because there's something so intimate about them and wonderful.
Yeah, so I want to ask our guests our first question about this election cycle, which is obviously we're all sort of getting, bombarded with the message that this presidential election is the most important election of our lifetimes, and that actually may be true. But why should people be like just as invested in the down ballot races and ballot initiative fights and things like that? Why don't we start with Jasmine?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, all of these, you guys have articulated it really well, but, these down ballot races are, key places where we can, make a huge impact, I think, in all kinds of issues. And, yeah, I mean, these are places where, we, can really make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you back with your charger, Jonathan?
Yes,
All right.
I've returned with my computer charging. And I think that the one thing that's especially important for people to realize is that there are just some issues that are more of local issues than they are federal issues. It's a natural tendency to immediately go to the national level on like every single issue. But if you think, as I noted before, like schools, if you care about school funding, that's primarily a local issue. That's not as much of a federal issue. If you care about housing policy, that's going to be largely a local and maybe to some extent state issue. If you care a lot about the criminal legal system in your state, that's typically more of a state issue than it is a federal issue. In a number of states, if you care about your transit systems, we need much more of an infusion of federal dollars, but that's going to be a heavily state, some extent city. Particularly the streets will be city, even if the buses and trains might tip state, or kind of a mix of both. So there are so many different things that you encounter on the day-to-day basis that are decided by the people who win these elections. And they're elections that often get overshadowed. And by being smaller, they can be won by just like so much smaller total numbers of voters.
Right. Like a lot of these elections are coming down to like a handful of votes, right? Like under 100 votes, right? So for some local races. Like
we had one state rep race recently in the primary in Massachusetts that it was 40 votes that decided between the incumbent and her challenger. Wow. So, and the way I like describe that to people is that literally all that means is that there are 21 people who change. Like all that you need to have is like 21 people changing their mind, and you have a different outcome. Yeah, because it's that narrow. And that we've had I know that in Boston we had a city council race that was decided by literally one vote.
Wow! Wow! Which one was that?
That was when Julia Mejia got on the council back in 2019.
Wow.
She beat Alejandro Sinkian by literally one vote. Out of all of the votes cast in the entire city of Boston, there was one vote between the two of them.
Wow. If you ever think your vote doesn't matter, it might.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's always the striking thing. Like there will be whenever you see those races that are, and the odds of them being decided by narrow margins will go up when there's kind of on small things. You'll occasionally see things at the congressional level or higher that are like super narrow like that. But for state rep races, for like a kind of a council race, you can have things super narrow like that. And so much, and what's always fascinating about that as well is that the narrative of what happens from an election changes radically, even based on like if a 50.1 49.9 race flips to the other, suddenly the entire narrative of what just happened will be different, because so much of what happens is like kind of the winners get to tell the story. So the person who wins with 50.1% gets to tell like, even though at the end of the day it's a few people voting,
right?
But you get to shape that narrative, and then that shapes the narrative. That shapes what other people think about what messages and lessons they should take from an election, and it also can shape what people will run for the seat down the road, because it shapes people's perceptions of what a district is.
Yeah, as you were going through that list, Jonathan, of issues that are predominantly decided at the local level, I was struck that it was almost all of what we consider like the social determinants of health, the things that decide whether you get sick or die earlier in the first place before you ever land up in the healthcare system. But you could also, I mean, we could throw public health in there. And even though there is national healthcare policy, and obviously we want to win Medicare for all at the national level, a lot of healthcare is decided also at the state level. Medicaid expansion, these attacks on transgender healthcare access, reproductive healthcare access. These are like huge fights happening at the local level, especially this year. So,
and in places like Texas, and I think some other states, right? A lot of your access to healthcare will be determined by your county and by the county judge who you will elect, because why not elect a judge? I just like sometimes it's kind of weird to me that there are some things that make sense to elect, right? Like elect a mayor, right? Or whatever, elect a legislator. But like a judge, isn't that like a profession? Shouldn't someone have to have some experience? I don't know. Shouldn't there be more of a, anyway.
I don't know. He's going for judge. You're probably more qualified than the average judge in Texas, simply by not being as batshit is probably a lot of Texas judges.
Jillian for judge. Jillian for judge.
All right, this might be the birth of my local judge campaign. But what I did want to say, though, wanted to kind of pick up on that about that's kind of the narrowness of margins, right? Is that it tends to make the individual a lot more important. Right. So, honestly, Kamala doesn't really care what I think, for the most part. Right. But right. If someone is running for city council in my district in Texas, where the election is going to be determined by 50 votes, they very much care what I think and what I'm going to tell my friends and, what my family thinks and, whatever. And so I think it's always just a great opportunity to inject whatever issues are important to you into the election. And at the local level, people really have to deal with them in a way that maybe at the national level they don't.
And I think that's such a great point, because if you're thinking about a local race, whether it's a state legislative race, whether it's a city council, town council, or whatever race, that candidate might come to your door to knock on it. President, Senate, Congress, they aren't coming to your door. That they're only coming to their door in your direct door in a staged photo op. You might, in congressional races, more of a chance than on Senate. No chance on presidential unless it's a staged photo op.
I wish fucking Ted Cruz would come to my house. Let me tell you. I wish. Get all
right?
crazy on him. Anyway, but yeah, you're right. They might actually come. They might meet you in person. And I think that, I guess this is something that we don't really talk about a lot, but when you work on someone to elect someone, right? I think that gives you more leverage once they're elected. Am I wrong? No, I'm right, right?
No, it definitely does, because a lot of what they will think about issues is about whom they surround themselves with.
Yeah.
And especially if they're in a situation where that they expect to face competitive elections in the future, they are incentivized to want to keep on board the people who got them there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
As well as because campaigns can often hire people who worked on the campaign, then you might also know a bunch of the people.
This does happen.
Yeah.
All of our friends have gotten jobs that way eventually. Let's just talk a little bit, because I'm the title of this episode is Boo and Vote Local, and so I want to get into the concept of boo and vote, which is Jonathan's personal philosophy. And so I just I'll preface this by saying, because Jonathan is probably the most civically engaged person that I know, at least. Most of us probably. Now that listeners, now that you've been introduced to him, he's the most civically engaged person that you know. This guy is tracking and analyzing elections across the country, but you're generally involved in most of the races in Massachusetts, both as an enthusiastic volunteer for progressive candidates, block walking. How many miles do you generally block walk in an election?
Oh, that's I should figure that out, that there were times recently in the primary where I was hitting 20 miles a day across the weekend.
Oh my goodness.
I think Jonathan probably meets more Massachusetts voters than Elizabeth Warren or Ed Markey.
Yeah. I certainly get more FaceTime with him. Yeah, no, absolutely. But then also, right, you're definitely involved as a vocal critic of candidates who are not progressive and who are not meeting the needs of the people. So you've expressed this philosophy as boo and vote. Boo like a ghost, and vote. And so tell me, what does it mean to you, and why is it on your shower curtain behind you?
Yes. Well, it's closet, not but,
oh, I'm sorry, that's your closet. It's not your shower. You're not.
Yes, it's a closet. It's a closet. No, but Mark, the same. Bought it on Etsy. So it dates back. I've had this as part of my Twitter handle for a number of years now, and I'd be fascinated to even look back to see when it was. And I'd originally built that in as a line back when people on Twitter would make Halloween themed versions of their names in the month of October. And I realized I could come up with no spooky rendition of Jonathan or Cohn that I liked enough. But then it being election season, and I also thought of the line that I never liked that Obama would often use to people of telling them, don't boo, vote. Because that line always bothered me. It kind of counterpose two things that I don't view as mutually exclusive. Whereas I believe that as kind of an activist, that I have the right to boo, to heckle, to jeer, to criticize, to protest, all of the different things that deserve that, of the failures of bad action, inaction, and everything that exists in between that you will come across in the legislative cycle. But at the same time, yes, I will vote, and yes, I will hustle to get other people out to vote as well, because both of them matter. And voting is an essential part of democracy. It's not the only aspect of democracy, and all of that work of effectively booing those in power is also important to making change. And that ultimately seeing any improvement in your city, in your state, your county, in your country relies on both of those happening at the same time, of getting the better people in office and being willing to put pressure on holding people accountable, pushing them, or if they're not doing good stuff, jeering them till they don't run for office or you in there.
Jeffrey Sanchez. I love this philosophy. These things are not mutually exclusive. And one thing that I want to point out is that one of the things that Jonathan is really good at, that I think that the rest of the left needs to be better at, is not just holding accountable our enemies, right? But holding accountable our friends as well, right? I can think of lots of instances where where you're jeering, right, has helped to make progressive candidates more progressive and hold them accountable to what they said during the election. And that kind of thing.
Yeah, which I think is such an important thing to do as well, because that there are people that obviously you might not have the same degree of intensity, but you should be able to still point out the shortcomings of those you support. And that's one thing that's also always a really annoying thing that can so often happen, particularly at the national level when it's election season, when people will talk about how, oh, you can't criticize said candidate because it's an election season. Well, frankly, given how absurdly long our elections are, it's always an election season. So like that argument doesn't work because that writes out the ability to criticize those in power at any point in time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, elections are arguably when candidates most listen to their constituents.
Exactly.
So it's kind of the moment there. So I want to ask maybe Jasmine first, how do you approach this balancing act between kind of issue-based organizing during election season and then actual electoral work? I know every union has to kind of juggle these two, as the same thing as community activists do. But
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, to your point, Ben, like the election times are the times when they are frankly often the most responsive to us.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, it's a balance we try to strike in our work at NNU. Obviously, like we are National Nurses United, proudly the country's largest nurses union. We're, deeply involved in the like electoral cycle. I think is, labor across the board, us included, has like a key role to play in electing the candidates, who are going to fight for working class people. But it's also, we are also really proud to be, a union that is, on the forefront of fighting for Medicare for all in the United States. And there's really interesting and creative ways, I think, in election cycles like we're in right now to really like take advantage of like all these candidates who are running, right? I think the nature of like our organizing work just looks different to me right now in like this moment in October before the election than it's going to look next, spring 2025. We just have like different opportunities right now with like thousands and thousands of candidates running for office across the country, where like the types of tactics and like strategies that we can be employing as organizers to fight for healthcare justice, it looks different right now, in like ways that we can like hold these candidates accountable when they're running for office. I think for us, a lot of that has looked like putting effort into this pledge that we started along with you guys at Healthcare Now, a bunch of partners. We started a couple years ago this campaign called the Patients Over Profits Pledge, and it calls on candidates and elected officials to reject campaign contributions from the corporate healthcare industry. We took a lot of inspiration from our friends in the climate justice movement,
Mhm.
who had, came up with a similar pledge years ago, the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. We wanted to do the same thing in healthcare. And so we've been, working on that. I think pledges like these, where we're taking advantage at peak times when folks are like taking donations, right, and like thinking about where they're getting their money from, and at times when they're vulnerable and want to like send a message about like the type of candidate they are, is like the perfect time for us to be asking them to do things like take these pledges.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind if we just go a little further in on this Patients Over Profits pledge? Because like, I am just so proud to be a part of this project with y'all, and it's just been wonderful. We love working with the Nurses Union in general, but this has been such a great opportunity to expand the discussion. So, okay, we were talking about how some issues are sort of more federal than local, right? And so, people might think of Medicare for All because it's about a national healthcare system, right, as being like a national issue, right? What role does it play to have these pledges, being signed by local candidates, right? Like what does that do for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge opportunity. I think like anyone who thinks that healthcare is not, like an issue in your community on Main Street, I would really challenge that notion, because the corporate healthcare industry is trying to influence our democracy from down ballot to the very top, right? I mean, you don't have to like look very far to find like, Blue Cross Blue Shield Arena, or like, Sutter Health Park, or whatever, like the ways that like the corporate healthcare industry is like very present in our communities. I remember there's a great story of one of our Patients Over Profits pledge signers is this just excellent state representative from Tennessee named Representative Afton Ben. I would recommend that folks follow her on social media. She's a extremely just great progressive ally in the South. She's a Patients Over Profits pledge signer. And she tells this story about, the Tennessee Medical Association coming into her office as a state rep and, sliding a check across the table at her and, making it really clear, what they were, the kind of relationship they were hoping for. And she talks about, proudly sliding the check back to them and rejecting it. Right. So, we should understand, I think, that the corporate healthcare industry, from hospital corporations, insurance, pharma, are trying to influence our democracy and our political process from top to bottom, and want to build relationship with those elected officials. And so our opportunity, right, is to that's what we're trying to do with the pledge, I think, is toxify that relationship, right? To make it uncool to take corporate healthcare money. And I think that's a huge opportunity at folks with at all levels of office.
We can take some language from the National Democratic Party and say that it's weird. It's really weird to take money from healthcare. But I like what you said too about they want to develop relationships with these legislators. I know we're focusing on local elections right now, but thinking about someone like Tim Walz, who, when he was a state legislator, was actually elected largely by the contributions of the Mayo Clinic, right? And so they start out when people are just beginning, right? And try to develop those relationships. Is that something?
Jillian, you're electing Trump. You can't say bad things about Tim Walz.
I'm kidding. And that's why we're not getting into this discussion. Jonathan, say some more things.
I feel like if we wanted to criticize that tendency that any possible left criticism is a way of electing Trump, it'd be funny to have a kind of a buzzer that every time somebody does something, you're sorry, he's already won the election. It's because of you, because of those exact words that you said have lost the election. But I was going to basically say what you were just saying, Jillian, is that your local elections are also on a pipeline of people who might possibly be state electeds, who might go up national, because a number of the people who are in Congress even started somewhere. And so the your health insurance companies, your hospitals want to have relationships with all of those people early on. And it's bad if their idea of what healthcare policy is only shaped by those voices. Because if there are people who are active donors coming out of the world of for-profit healthcare, people often attribute expertise to those who work in a given industry, and they shouldn't be treated as the go-to. The go-to is on healthcare, not health knowledge, particularly because if you're working to extract money from the system rather than do direct care. But so often that ends up being the case, and that whom people listen to shapes the decisions that they make.
Yeah. And this is not we're making the podcast too Massachusetts centric. We've got a critical mass of 3 current and former Massachusetts.
Critical mass.
But
Massachusetts.
Yeah, that was unintentional. But I'd say about 10 or 15 years ago, the healthcare industry became the most powerful political lobby in the state, and they kind of surpassed the kind of financial industry, which I think the banks and stuff used to be of running the show in terms of the most powerful corporate lobbies. And that is starting to happen all over the country, just because the healthcare industry grows exponentially every single year, even when there's downturns, even when the rest of the economy is shrinking, the healthcare industry is growing. And that's obviously on the other end, that's why our costs are rising so rapidly. But the growth itself leads to a lot of political power. And, for some of these, certainly for state reps and state senators, but also for congressional representatives, often the healthcare industry is the biggest employer in their district. If there's a hospital in your district, or, even if you're not in Connecticut where all the insurance companies are or something, they just have a tremendous amount of pull. So that's why there's such a big organizing task ahead of us, to kind of counterbalance that.
But I think, I think one of the best things about the Patients Over Profits pledge, though, is that it helps us to build that kind of movement that we need, right? Like build up that pressure from the bottom level.
Yeah.
So, Jasmine, tell us about some of the ways that people have used these the pledge in like their local communities to, kind of start conversations.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've been working on the pledge a ton this year. I'm really proud that we've added 100 signers to the pledge in this election cycle. So we've gone from 100. Yeah, we just hit 250 signers. A couple days ago, and to the point you guys are making, like that is, I think, really the intention. That folks can make an impact on this, like in your community, with every single city council member, your mayor, your state representatives. We're trying to build this, like this groundswell of hundreds, and we want to get this to like thousands of elected officials and candidates up and down the ballot across the country to be taking the pledge. That is how we're going to really start to toxify the relationship between the influence of the corporate healthcare industry on our political system and our elected officials, is just building up the legitimacy and the bench of folks who are taking the pledge. And I really do think that starts locally, where we really want to get to a place where like members of Congress are like taking the Patients Over Profits pledge. I mean, folks with the No Fossil Fuel Money pledge had great success with this after like years and years of work. In 2020, they got all of the major presidential candidates to take that pledge. But the advice that they gave us when we were starting this out was like, we started with 2 or 3 years of just like building this pledge in communities across the country and focusing on folks from like city council members to state reps to like build its reputation and like build it up as like a legitimate thing that is like has weight behind it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that means that like the most important work is like the work folks can be doing in your own community. We're having great success with the pledge, with folks just showing up to in-person events happening right now, like candidate forums, picnics and canvases, places where like candidates are at, and just like bringing a stack of like, we have, a physical printable pledge, and I can talk more about, how to get those materials and things. But, there's a physical printable pledge you can just bring a stack of on a clipboard. And those have been some of the most successful moments, or just folks going to those events and walking up, to candidates in their town and asking them to take it.
I did that once.
Did you? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. There was I can't remember. I don't think it was Progressive Mass. I think it was, oh gosh.
Was it one of the Raise Up campaigns?
What's that?
Was it one of the Raise Up campaigns?
It might have been. It was some forum that was it was bringing together a bunch of progressive candidates. So I kind of tabled there, and I just grabbed candidates as I walked by, and I was like, "Hey, will you sign this?" And we got a bunch of them to say yes, especially given the crowd in the room. If they say no, it's a little bit, iffy. So you can apply some social pressure there. But yeah, it really does work. And I think it's a great point that I think a lot of people get frustrated when they can't get their like member of Congress or senator to do what they want, and they start feeling hopeless. It's like, well, start way, way, way further down first, Start with your really local elected candidates, and then work your way up to those much, much harder campaign objectives. So.
Yeah. Because if you can tell the governor that, actually we have, 12 state legislators here who have signed already, right? Like all of a sudden
that makes a difference too. Yeah.
Momentum.
A lot of people don't like to first.
Yeah. So we're coming up towards the end here, but I think, Jonathan, I'm going to ask you first. What would you say are some like tips for listeners who are looking to get more active in their local elections? Where do you start? What are some ways that you can kind of make a mark in this coming month?
I would say that if you're getting involved, figure out what's on your ballot and what's on the ballot nearby. There are typically websites, whether it's something that you can find through a Secretary of State's website or through, insofar as local news still exists, local news. And if there are candidates or if there are like ballot initiatives that are specifically of interest to you, reach out. They're probably really excited to hear from potential volunteers. What kind of we can say from having worked on so many campaigns over the years, that the volunteer who shows up multiple times is like gold to any campaign because of how difficult it is to get people to show up at all. So especially if you're showing up multiple times. And then you'll get to meet new people. If you decide to knock on doors, as I describe it as you're taking a walk and maybe you'll talk to some people. You get to meet your neighbors. You get to see parts of you get to see parts of the city or town where you live that you might not have walked through otherwise, and you get some good exercise in beautiful fall weather, and in service of a cause that you care about. So it's a win-win-win in different ways. And people don't bite, so don't be afraid. They don't answer their door anyway, so like also don't be afraid of that. But no, that you'll have a positive experience. It's a way of helping to make a difference in your community, and don't be afraid of reaching out. People will be happy to hear from you.
Be slightly more careful if your state has standard ground laws, though, because you can get slightly more trouble. But in general, yes, people don't bite.
And Jasmine, how would people get involved with the Patients Over Profits Pledge campaign if they want to take that pledge to their own local candidates or electeds? And again, this is a pledge that can be taken by people who are currently in office or who are running but have not necessarily won office. Yeah. So there's really a broad range of folks you can ask for this. But
yeah, definitely. I mean, I hope people will get involved with it if they're not yet. First of all, people should do everything that Jonathan just said. But in addition to all of that, in the next few weeks, I mean, if folks are looking for that, that balance of that, like issue-based organizing and continuing to like campaign on Medicare for all right now in this election season, I really do think that, organizing in your community on the Patients Over Profits Pledge is this is the time. It's a great time to be doing that. And we would love to support anyone who wants to work on the pledge. I have a bit.ly I can read out if that's okay.
Yes.
It would be.
And then we'll put it in the show notes, but yes, read it out for now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So if folks go to bit.ly, which is like the way that Bitly does their URLs. So like bit.ly/pop interest, POP-interest. That's our interest in sign up form. If you sign up there's all kinds of volunteer opportunities for everything from, going out in your community to events that we're finding, to these picnics and forums and debates, to just like helping with our, we have a huge team of volunteers who are just like sending emails and like DMing on social media to like candidates and elected officials, to even like back of house kind of stuff. We have an amazing volunteer research team that's helping to find contact information and finding these events all over the country. So there's lots of different opportunities, and that's the link that folks can go to get involved.
Yay!
Awesome.
I love that you're getting into the DMs. That feels intimate in the best way.
All right. Well, this makes me feel more hopeful about this election cycle. I always get so depressed with, especially if you get fixated on the top of the ticket. Yes. It can be sometimes quite depressing. You don't feel fully represented by anyone usually. But there's so much more that we can have an impact on, and that's just going to have huge impacts on our lives. So thank you, Jasmine and Jonathan. Really, really appreciate your time and your insights on all this. I also want to thank the podcast team, without whom we could not do any of this. Our podcast manager is Angelique Davis. Our show notes writer is Jerry Katz. And our audio editor is Craig Stanton. So don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to the Medicare for All podcast on whatever platform that you use. And don't forget, this show is a project of the Healthcare Now Education Fund. Mm-hmm. So if you want to support our work and the podcast, you can donate at our website, healthcare-now.org. Thanks, everyone.
Stay dangerous. Stay safe and stay dangerous.
That too. See you on the campaign trails.